just to respond to a few points really quick, the brother Ken, he quoted from a book that said the word Becca means shekel, and that's not really the issue, because we didn't ask for the definition of the word Becca, we asked for the location of the word Becca, and the Quran confirms that Mecca was referred to as Becca, and so really our point still stands. As far as everything he said about the Comforter, inshallah ta'ala, I will address that in the misconception session of Islam, which will be after the dinner break, inshallah ta'ala. He made one quick point referring to the fact that Muhammad did not partake in the covenant of Abraham. And the covenant, we have to define this word in the book of Genesis, as many Christians are here today are probably aware of. Covenant refers to the covenant of circumcision. And so it's not really, it doesn't mean that anybody outside this covenant cannot be a prophet. Getting into the main point, when we discuss prophecies of the Bible, there are 4 types of prophecies, inshallah, that I want to cover. First point, prophecies that point to the coming of Jesus, which we find in the Old Testament. Second point, prophecies that Christians say point to the coming of Jesus, but this cannot be true. Third point, prophecies which Christians say point to Jesus, but in fact they point to Muhammad. And the fourth point, if I have time, will be unfulfilled prophecies in the Bible, inshallah ta'ala. The first point, prophecies for Jesus. The Muslim does not hesitate to accept that there are prophecies for Jesus in the Old Testament. There is no problem accepting this, because in fact Jesus is recorded in the Quran, Surah number 3, verse number 50, as saying, "Before I come," he says, "and I come confirming that which was before me of the Torah." The word confirm, according to Webster's dictionary, means to give new assurance to the validity of. So in other words, Jesus in the Quran is quoted as saying, "I come to confirm the Torah." In other words, prove the parts which point to my coming. And in doing so, he gives a new assurance to the validity of the Torah. The definition fits exactly. An example of one such prophecy is if you read in Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, God is speaking there, and he says, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to the temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in." Matthew chapter 11, verse 10 says that this prophecy was fulfilled. John the Baptist is the messenger who prepares the way, and Jesus is the messenger of the covenant. As a Muslim, I have no problem to accept this. Second point, prophecies which Christians say refer to Jesus, but they cannot. Now the brother Ken, he did not use this verse, and I'm sure he does not use this verse when he discusses things, but I have seen a lot of Christians use this verse, so I want to address it. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 11 through 14 states basically, and God is talking, he says, "I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son." Now that sounds a lot like what Christians claim of Jesus, and it seems like it could fit, but the problem is Christians stop reading at verse 14. If they keep reading, they would see the verse goes on to say, "I will be his father, he will be my son, and when he does wrong, I will punish him." Surely the Christians do not believe that Jesus did wrong and was punished. But that doesn't matter, because if you read 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 2 through 5, you see that this prophecy was actually fulfilled with Solomon, and it has nothing to do with Jesus. Third point, prophecies which Christians say refer to Jesus, but in fact they refer to Muhammad. He spent some amount of time on Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, in which God says to Moses, "I will raise up a prophet like unto thee from among their brethren." The problem with his interpretation is he gives a narrow interpretation. He gives a singular definition to a word that has many definitions and possibilities. He focused on the word brethren, and he says, since Muhammad was not an Israelite, he cannot be considered among the brethren of the Israelites. But I mean, we use the word brethren fairly, in a loose fashion. I mean, for example, anybody of a common heritage you can call your brother. How many times have we heard the African-American brothers in the streets, they walk up to each other and they say, "What's going on, brother?" Because they share a common ancestor, or a common ancestry, I should say. And we have brothers in Islam. Brother Ahmed, that's what I call him, see? So it's a very ambiguous term. It doesn't have to have a crystal clear interpretation. Given the fact that Muhammad was from the lineage of Ishmael, who was in fact the second son of Abraham, the first son being Isaac, I think we can safely say that there's no problem for Muhammad to be considered in this general umbrella of the brothers of the Israelites. Now the reason Deuteronomy 18:18 cannot refer to Jesus, it cannot, because of Acts chapter 3, verses 20 through 23. In these verses, Peter is talking to a group of Jewish people. And he says, and he's talking about Jesus, and he says, "He must remain in heaven until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through his holy prophets. For Moses said, 'The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me from among your brethren.'" Now pay close attention to the wording of this verse. This is Peter talking. He, Jesus, must remain in heaven until, we're asking, until when? Until the time comes for God to restore everything as he promised long ago through holy prophets. What did he promise long ago through his holy prophets? The verse explains that to you. For Moses said, "The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me from among your brethren." So the question is, if after the ascension, which is when this verse takes place, Jesus is already gone, he's in heaven, and he must stay in heaven until Deuteronomy 18:18 is fulfilled, how can we say this verse is referring to Jesus? It is impossible. There's no way. We also read a very interesting episode in John chapter 1, several verses, 19 through 25. And we see in these verses that the Jews are waiting 3 distinct people. And these verses state, "Now this is John's testimony. When the Jews of Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him, he did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, 'I am not the Christ.' They asked him, 'Then who are you? Are you Elijah?' And he said, 'I am not.' 'Are you the prophet?' And he answered, 'No.' Finally they said, 'Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?' And John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, 'I am the voice of one calling in the desert, make straight the way for the Lord.' Now some Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, and pay attention to this part. 'Why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ, neither Elijah, nor the prophet?'" Okay, that's very interesting. He quoted Irenaeus earlier, and Irenaeus is what is known as a church father. Okay, I have a quote concerning these verses I just read from another church father from the 2nd century, Origen. He is a 2nd century Christian scholar, and he is one of the early church fathers. And he wrote in his commentary of the verses I just read, "As many prophets had appeared in Israel, and one in particular was looked for, according to the prophecy of Moses in Deuteronomy, they," the Jews questioning John the Baptist, "therefore ask a third question, not whether he is a prophet, but whether he is the prophet. Now they did not apply this name to Christ, but they supposed the prophet to be a second figure beside Christ. But John, on the contrary, who knew that he was a forerunner to both the Christ and the prophet, thus foretold, answered, 'No.' Whereas if they had asked if he was a prophet, he would have answered yes, for he was not unconscious that he was a prophet." You can read this commentary for yourself at newadvent.org, which is the Catholic website, and just look up the Church Fathers' biblical commentaries, inshallah ta'ala. Now, the brother gave a long list of reasons of how Moses is like Jesus. We can offer the contrapositive of that and prove ways in which Muhammad and Moses are similar and Jesus is excluded from most of these. Number 1, family life. Both Moses and Muhammad had a family. They had wives, they had children. Number 2, both Moses and Muhammad brought a religion of law. Jesus did not bring a religion of law. 3, both Moses and Muhammad were prophets only. Jesus, according to Muslims and Christians, is the Messiah, and according to Christians is the Son of God and the third incarnation of the Trinity. The second incarnation. 4, both Muhammad and Moses fought wars. Jesus did not, and they did this in defense of the faith. 5, both Moses and Muhammad were a head of state. Jesus was not. 6, both Moses and Muhammad built a nation. Jesus did not. 7, both Moses and Muhammad built that nation from scratch. Jesus did not build a nation. 8, both Moses and Muhammad were both fully human. Jesus say that Christians was the Son of God. And the 9th point, both Moses and Muhammad were of the Semitic races, which are both Arabs and Hebrews are considered a Semitic race. Jesus is also included in that. And the final point I want to address, because I do have a little extra time, is unfulfilled prophecies. The brother, Ken, did not ever answer the point of 2 Timothy 4:18, where it says that Paul was saved from where Paul prophesies that he will be saved from every attack. And as we know, as I quoted from historical sources, Paul was beheaded in 64 AD, and beheading, if somebody wanted to cut my head off, that certainly would be an attack. One more unfulfilled prophecy I want to address in the Bible. Jeremiah chapter 34, verses 2 through 5 say that Zedekiah, the king of Judah, will die in peace. Jeremiah 52, verses 9 through 11 say that Zedekiah's children were killed in front of him, his eyes were gouged out, he was put in fetters and chains and imprisoned until his death. And that is not a very peaceful death. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Brother Omar. I appreciate very much this 5 minutes that I'll have in our discussion together. As for the 9 points of making an analogy, Brother Ahmed or it would be Brother Omar, did not touch the fact as we speak about Muhammad, or I should say this person, yes, Muhammad himself, that Muhammad is the lineage of Ishmael. You'll notice I left the overheads up here to be discussed because the question whether or not about Muhammad is the question I've shown you good evidence from the Qu'ran that it's specified that through the lineage. And there's some comment made that how it might be ambiguous, and it's a broad term in relationship to Abraham and Muhammad, but it's not so in the Quran. I've shown you. Matter of fact, let's go back over that very quickly. I have several here. Even in the Quran, what does it do? It specifies Isaac and Jacob. Now, I might have brought up something about the Jews, but, you know, as we talk about some of these arguments, these weren't touched top, side, nor bottom. Now, there's evidence here. Now, we can talk about other analogies between Muhammad and Jesus or Muhammad and Moses, but when we're going to be specific, it specifies in the Quran, it also specifies in the Bible that Isaac and Jacob would have the seal, would have the approval of prophethood among whom? The Israelites. Something was talked about a covenant because circumcision, yes, you had circumcision by Abraham, but do you also not have after this, do you not have revelation? Do you not have in Deuteronomy that supersedes that this is continuation? And when something was said about a shekel, all I did is show and made reference to the Pictorial Bible Dictionary of Becca. It's a half shekel. Now, when we talk about what qualifies Jesus and what qualifies Muhammad from this important universal truth, all the particulars are irrelevant. If we find that Muhammad is from Ishmael, he is not from the lineage of Isaac, then it is Jesus. And I've shown you in the Quran, I've shown you evidence to support that. And as we talk about certain terms, kingdom, we didn't get into 2 Samuel 7. If I overlooked that, my apology. We don't have a great deal of time here to look at all of them, but this is a central thought. This was not touched, top, side, nor bottom. As we look from both the Quran and the Bible, again, we determine, I have 2 minutes, you and I can determine whether or not Muhammad, who is from the lineage of Ishmael, is from the lineage of Isaac. And he is not. That was not touched. And the reason I say that, and I'm not trying to be adversarial, but my question is, you in the audience, do you want to put your hope in something that seems close? Do you want to put your hope in something that even if you're a follower of the Quran, that the Quran itself specifies? A lineage? Is that something you want to put your soul salvation in? Don't take a word what I'm saying, but look at the evidence, friends and brethren. It was not touched. Context will determine. When God specifies, He excludes everything else. Is that not so also in fiqh? If not, that can be discussed, but nonetheless, to make the premise that there's a similarity between Muhammad and Moses, that started out in the Bible. And I've shown you both, the Bible and the Quran, what it had to say. Thank you.